In this session, we're going to explore mixed reality from our audience's point of view. It's less about what we want to create and how to create, and more about the experience that we create. First, let's understand different ways of telling stories. As we discovered in the first course, our mind really likes filling in the gaps. We're continuously telling ourselves a logical narrative of what is happening around us. Over the ages, we've evolved multiple media that rely on our natural tendency to fill in the gap, to tell stories. So a typical story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it typically moves forward in time. For the longest time, the role of the audience was to sit still and listen. There's not much we, the audience, could do to change the course of the story or our experience of it. It's only recently that we as audience have been given more agency through interactive technologies. We see this in online storytelling and computer games, and now also mixed reality. So if you take the level of agency as a guide, there's two levels or two ways to do storytelling. One is linear, and one is nonlinear or dynamic. Linear storytelling is what we're familiar with from cinema and books. Nonlinear is what we experience in some computer games where the outcome is not fixed. The audience's actions determine what story they experience. We can also call this interactive storytelling. The author and audience collaborate to create a story unique to each person in the experience. I talked to Yasmin Elayat about storytelling in two of her projects, 0 Days and Blackout. Here she is reflecting on how the storytelling style evolved for 0 Days.
Yeah, so in general, I should mention, and my background is has always been at the intersection of technology and narrative or building or storytelling. And how do you create these interactive experiences with audiences or participatory documentaries? So I have a bias towards engaging or collaborating with the audience itself, or having the audience become the storytellers. So I come from that background, and so that is originally the bias I enter a project with. And so when I was directing 0 Days, the original concept was actually to create something that was, it's a cyber detective mystery that unfolds, but you could, it was a non-branching idea, non-branching narratives, where through how you enter the story, you would like kind of piece the puzzle pieces together and deduce whatever you can from kind of this like mystery solving puzzle piece. But as we were working through this and starting to approach it this way, I realized that actually this is quite problematic for the subject matter. It's, the journalistic, we had to maintain the journalistic integrity of 0 Days, and we quickly learned that if you switch the the sequence of the storytelling, or if someone just never happened to get a piece of information that they needed because they just didn't go into that branching narrative, it would be actually, you could cause like misattribution, or it would be inaccurate. And so interactivity had to take a back seat for the journalistic integrity of the piece. And that was the decision made pretty early on through user testing and prototyping of 0 Days. And so it became a much more linear, it's still 6 degrees of freedom, but it became a much more linear narrative because we needed you to experience it in this way for the story and the information.
It's interesting that they started off wanting to be interactive, but found that the content, the topic, and underlying narrative did not lend itself for that. So 0 Days VR is an immersive linear experience. There's some agency in that I can look wherever I want, but it won't affect the story. Here Yasmin is talking about how they evolved the storytelling style for Blackout.
With Blackout, it's completely driven by the audience, the person in the space. It's almost like we're inviting you into this world, and the story unfolds because you want it to unfold and how you want it to unfold. And it is, I call it fluid interactivity or interaction design. It's like a very, like we use things like, it's not just like you walk around and look at someone and then it's like a mouse, and you just click, oh, here I hear their stories. It's actually much more nuanced and layered. We really thought deeply about these are human beings and they're sharing very deep information, and you need to earn it. And so we were measuring things like your commitment to different people, intimacy, which is like, how much you were spending with different people, and like how much you got into their stories without interruption. We were also measuring, we had a whole crowd dynamics engine essentially, which is kind of the engineering side of the design of the experience. And we really thought deeply about this idea that in a shallow mode, you can only hear people's thoughts. So their shopping list, their worries, they're like, oh, when am I picking up my daughter from school? And it's noisy and a little chaotic. But the idea is once you start actually entering, we draw you in, and once you start entering these people's stories, or you're spending more time with someone, you're actually rewarded by getting to know them on a much deeper level, and it's built into the interaction design. And so while, as I said, you can move around and meet different people and spend time with different people, you're also quite respectful of these people, and you walk around them. Like most people actually treated them like it's a human person in front of them, and they treated them that way. On a higher level, we also needed a way to have a narrative arc, and from past experience, my own experience in crowdsourcing or participatory projects, you sometimes have to sacrifice control over a narrative in order to create a lot of audience agency, and that's kind of always the tension, between narrative and interactivity. And the way we kind of solved it with Blackout, and I'm quite proud of it, is we had the ability, as I said, because we have deep stories, we started collecting themes and topics and kind of mood for all the different stories we had. And so we had a pretty high level narrative arc through the piece where, as I said, it's like shallower in the beginning and it's much more you getting to know people. And then we started building a narrative arc that would kind of unfold in between each act. And because of how we designed our system, you would actually not realize that you're entering the second act or the third act. We played with different environmental cues, lighting. We play with music to set the tone, color and saturation, etc. We played with a lot of like the environment to kind of set the tone, but the stories were also changing as this narrative arc was evolving. And so we started off with the very kind of talking about how divided we are, and everyone's talking about their otherness issues or their identity issues or things they had to they're suffered in their lives, and it starts developing into the second act, which people start talking about things they've overcome. And the final act is really about community and kind of considering America in a different light, and like the beauty of New York, and the sense of finding a new family or finding a new community or finding a new home. And so it had a much more positive vibe. And in between, we'd have these interrupters, actually, and they're performers, just like you would on a normal subway. And they meant to break the narrative arc, or they were used as an element to move the story along. And so it's an interesting way to think about, I guess, experience design and interactivity. We, as I said, I like to call it fluid, experience design, or using normal human behavior, but translating it into this kind of immersive space, if that makes sense.
Yasmin also emphasized the collaborative nature of Blackout's experiential storytelling. As we discussed in Course 2, it takes a village.
I mean, I should mention also, as I said, the reason I think it works is also, obviously, so, my focus is on experience design, and so that I'm speaking very deeply on that side of things, but also my collaborators, Alexander Porter, who was the co-director of the piece, he is a master when it comes to volumetric filmmaking, and all the environmental cues, and as I said, the lighting and how things shift. This is and also just the 5-camera shoot. That's his. It's a pioneering way of filming. He's an expert, obviously, at the forefront of it. And then I just wanted to call out Hannah Jayanti, who was doing our 3-hour interviews. Her discursive, very open-ended interview style created these very rich stories. It feels like you're. It doesn't feel like you're, what's it called, prying into people's lives. It actually feels like they are really sharing with you, and that's a testament to the collaboration, I think, and everybody, what they brought to the table.